Yesterday morning, in a Pima County courtroom, a man named Alexander Zabel Jr. walked in wearing a clean shirt and a rehearsed apology. He is 27 years old. He runs a true crime live stream channel called CriminalNetwork. And for the last 4 months, he has been broadcasting from the sidewalk outside Nancy Guthrie's house. Not the news vans, not the FBI, him with a tripod, a traffic cone, and a bright blue tent, his followers, in a moment of pure internet cruelty, nicknamed the P tent, because Zabel wasn't leaving, not to eat, not to sleep, not for anything. He was camped on the curb of a missing 84-year-old grandmother's street, 24 hours a day, monetizing every camera flash the FBI triggered. And yesterday, July 21st, 2026, a judge in Tucson finally called the question, pleaded not guilty, both charges, obstruction of a public thoroughfare, public nuisance, released on his own recognizance. And by the time he walked out of that courthouse, his own live stream, still running from a friend's phone, had crossed 40,000 concurrent viewers, which is the part of this story nobody in mainstream news wants to say out loud. Because if you are watching this video right now, you are statistically part of the audience that made Alexander Zabel Jr. possible in the first place. Stay with me, because the courtroom moment yesterday is not really about him. It is about you and me, and the way this whole ecosystem is quietly eating a real family alive. Let me tell you about Zabel, because a lot of you have never heard the name. He does not have a mainstream following. He does not have a network deal. He has a YouTube channel called CriminalNetwork, a couple 100,000 subscribers, and a very specific business model. He drives to active crime scenes. He sets up a tripod at the property line. He turns on a live camera. And he talks for hours, for days, sometimes for weeks. He calls it citizen journalism. His critics, and there are a lot of them, call it something else. They call it grief tourism. His revenue comes from 3 places: super chats, which are little dollar tips viewers pay to have their comment read out on the stream; YouTube ad revenue on the live broadcast; and a Patreon on the side for behind-the-scenes footage. For most of the last year, that revenue was modest, steady, nothing remarkable. Then Nancy Guthrie went missing, and Zabel, according to his own channel analytics, saw his monthly income roughly triple. He was not the only one, but he was the loudest. And he was the one who did the one thing nobody else was willing to do. He set up a tent. Here is what actually happened. In late May, neighbors in the Catalina foothills started complaining to the Pima County Sheriff's Department. There was a man on the sidewalk who wasn't leaving. He had marked off a section of curb with orange traffic cones. He had a folding chair, a portable phone charger the size of a car battery, and a bright blue pop-up tent about 4 feet high tucked into the shade of a mesquite tree. Neighbors said they never saw him go home, never saw him walk to a car, never saw him go anywhere. He just stayed. And when a local Tucson reporter finally asked what the tent was for, one of Zabel's own moderators told her on camera that it was where he went to use the bathroom, because he wouldn't leave the spot. He was afraid he'd lose it to a competitor. That is how the internet gave the tent its name, and that is the exact moment this story stopped being about journalism and started being about something much darker. A grown man refusing to walk 50 feet to a gas station because the algorithm rewarded him for staying put, on the curb, outside the house of a missing 84-year-old woman, with a tent. Full stop. Zabel was arrested in early July. Not for stalking, not for harassment, for 2 very specific misdemeanors under Arizona state law: obstruction of a public thoroughfare, which means blocking a sidewalk or a curb in a way that interferes with normal traffic, and public nuisance, which is a catch-all statute Pima County uses when someone's presence in a public space becomes what the law calls an unreasonable burden on the neighborhood. Neither of those charges carries jail time on a first offense. Both are payable with a fine and a promise to stay away, and that is the tension, because the Guthrie family has been quietly begging the county for months to do something, anything, to move the live streamers off their street. Sheriff Chris Nanos, in a press briefing back in June, said his deputies were, quote, navigating a First Amendment situation, meaning the law protects a citizen's right to stand on a public sidewalk with a camera, even if that citizen is, in the family's own words, turning a nightmare into content. Yesterday's charges are the first time the county has been able to name the behavior in a courtroom. And the charges are deliberately small enough that they don't touch the free speech question at all. They just say, you cannot live on this curb. Yesterday's hearing lasted about 11 minutes. Zabel arrived with a court-appointed attorney. He wore a light blue button-down shirt and dark slacks. He did not make eye contact with the two Guthrie family representatives seated in the second row. The judge read the charges. Zabel entered a plea of not guilty on both counts. His attorney requested release on his own recognizance, citing no prior record and no risk of flight. The prosecution did not object. The judge signed the order, and the whole thing was over before most of the courtroom had settled into their seats. But here's the part the local Tucson coverage buried. As Zabel walked out of the courthouse, a second live streamer, one of his own community moderators, was already broadcasting from the sidewalk outside. Zabel walked up to that camera. He waved. He said, and I quote, "Back to the spot tonight, family. Same tent, same cone." That was not an apology. That was a promotion. And that is the moment the courtroom stopped being the story. Zabel is not alone. He is just the loudest. And it is important, as we talk about accountability, to name the other two live streamers who have been operating in the same square block outside Nancy Guthrie's home for the last 4 months. Michael Bradshaw, who runs a channel called DAA JUICE, is a former Uber driver from Phoenix who drove down to the Catalina foothills the week Nancy went missing and has been broadcasting almost every night since. He has a smaller audience than Zabel, but a more aggressive one, and he has been named in at least 2 separate neighborhood complaints for confronting residents on camera. And then there is Julien Enderle, whose channel goes by 857 Tucson, a former community college student who dropped out of school in April specifically to live stream the Guthrie case full-time. Enderle has not been arrested, Bradshaw has not been arrested, and neither of them has been charged. They watched Zabel walk out of that courtroom yesterday and, according to their own channels, went right back to work. Zabel's arrest did not end the ecosystem. It just moved it 50 feet down the block. Savannah Guthrie has not spoken publicly about the live streamers. Not once. Not on the Today Show. Not in a press release. Not in an interview. Not in a social media post. Her sister Cammie has said one sentence in a family statement issued in May, and I'll read it to you exactly as it was written. We ask that anyone who cares about our mother respect the sanctity of her home and the peace of her neighbors. That is the entire family statement. Nothing more. Nothing since. And that silence is doing a lot of work. Because a family with a famous daughter could, if they wanted to, launch a national pressure campaign against these channels tomorrow. They could name every one of them on live television. They could pressure YouTube to demonetize the broadcasts. They could sue. They have not. And people close to the family are quietly saying it is because the Guthries have been advised by the FBI that public confrontation with the live streamers might actually make the case worse. It might attract more of them. It might disrupt the neighborhood tip line. It might, in the worst case scenario, push the person who took Nancy further underground. So Savannah says nothing. And every night, the tent goes back up. Here is the part I do not want to say, but I have to. If you are watching this video right now on this channel in this format, you are part of the same demand curve that made Alexander Zabel Jr. a small internet celebrity. I am too. I make videos about this case. You watch them. That is a transaction. And I am not going to pretend I am somehow standing outside the ecosystem I am literally participating in right now. What I'm going to say is that there is a line, and that line is the porch. Zabel crossed it, Bradshaw crossed it, Enderle crossed it. They stopped being observers and started being residents of someone else's tragedy. They pitched a tent on the sidewalk of a missing woman's home and stayed there long enough that the sidewalk itself became a set. That is not journalism. That is not citizen reporting. That is squatting on grief. And the reason the Pima County courtroom yesterday matters, even though the charges were small, is that a judge, a prosecutor, and a neighborhood finally put a name on the behavior in a place with legal weight. That is how ecosystems change, not with one big lawsuit, with 100 small citations that slowly make the sidewalk unlivable. Zabel's next court date is set for late August. If he is convicted on both misdemeanors, the maximum penalty is a fine of around $1,000 and up to 6 months of court-ordered distance from the Guthrie property. That is it. No jail, no lasting record. And Zabel, according to his own community, has already fundraised enough on the live stream to pay the fine 3 times over. which is the darkest part of this whole situation. The punishment is smaller than the paycheck. The system, as it currently exists, cannot outbid the algorithm. That is going to have to change. And the only way it changes is if the audience decides, one click at a time, that a tent on a grieving family's curb is not entertainment, that the P tent is not a joke, that the moderator on the other end of the super chat is not a friend, and that the 84-year-old woman at the center of all of this is not and never was content. Nancy Guthrie has been missing for 172 days. Alexander Zabel Jr. spent 130 of those days on her street. He was arrested, he was arraigned, he entered his plea, he walked out of the courthouse yesterday, and before the sun went down, the tent was back up. The cone was back on the curb, the camera was back on the tripod, and the number in the top corner of the live stream was climbing again. If yesterday's verdict is going to mean anything, it is not going to be because of the judge. It is going to be because of you. The audience is the algorithm, and the algorithm is the only landlord that Tent has ever answered to. Subscribe if you want the August court date coverage without a single frame from a live stream camera. And if you know someone who watches these streams, send them this video. Not to shame them, just to ask them quietly what they think Savannah Guthrie sees when she scrolls past a tent on her mother's street.